we were definitely not prepared to receive that kind of news. Hey guys, so today I wanted to share the story of my experience with losing our daughter due to preterm labor. This is something that I've been wanting to share for a while, even though it's something that was really hard. This is something that I knew that I wanted to share with other people, just in case it might help someone. After this happened, I kept looking for these videos because I wanted to see if anyone else had gone through the same thing that I did. I wanted to hear other people's stories, and I felt so alone at this time that I watched these videos to help me realize that I wasn't alone, that other people had gone through this. And I also watched these videos to find hope, to make sure that everything was going to be okay. Even though I felt like my whole world was ending, I wanted to make sure that things were just going to get better. I wanted to find that hope. And so that's why I'm sharing this story, just in case anyone wants to know, or also if anyone is going through this, I am so sorry. Even if it helps one person, that'll definitely be worth it to me. But then even if it doesn't help anyone, I also just want to remember all the little details and remember the things that happened with my story. And so just to give a little bit of background with my pregnancy, my husband and I decided we wanted to start a family right away. So right after we got married, we started trying, and then a couple months later we got pregnant, and we were really excited. And everything went totally fine with my pregnancy. It was super healthy. Everything was great whenever we went to the doctor's appointments. I did have spotting just like 2 or 3 times throughout the pregnancy, but it would be very light. Like, it wouldn't even fill up a liner. It would just be a very minimal amount. And I would always talk to my OB about it, and they weren't concerned. Everything started Valentine's Day of 2020. And I remember that day. Valentine's Day was on a Friday. And I remember I was just feeling really good. I was finally starting to feel better. I was starting to show. The whole first 18, 19 weeks of my pregnancy, I was just throwing up all the time, multiple times a day. I was very sick, just with morning sickness, all the hormones, which is normal. And then I did have a really strong UTI at 18 weeks. And it was super painful. And it was so strong that I actually had to be put on 2 different rounds of antibiotics. But then I was finally starting to feel better. I was starting to show, and I felt so happy. I felt like I was finally just enjoying my pregnancy. And I remember I went into work that day, and it was really good. I was super happy. Work went super smoothly. They even had treats for us. They had like donuts and a soda bar because it was Valentine's Day. And my husband and I, we decided to go on a double date with some of our friends because they were gonna get married in a few days. And they wanted to know if we'd like to spend part of Valentine's Day with them to do a double date. And so we went out to eat. We went to this nice pizza place. It was super good. I was super happy that I was finally looking pregnant. It was just a really fun date. And then we decided to go over to their house afterwards to watch a movie. And at this point, I started to feel just a little bit uncomfortable. I kind of felt pressure. And honestly, it just felt like I had to go to the bathroom. And so when we got to their place, I tried to go to the bathroom, but I didn't go to the bathroom. And so honestly, I just thought I was constipated. That's just what it felt like. But it wasn't too bad. It wasn't too uncomfortable. So we watched a movie there with them, and then we left. My husband and I, we went back to our apartment. And we spent time together, and we played some games, and then we decided that we would probably end the night watching a movie. But at this point, I still felt that discomfort. I felt like I just had to go to the bathroom. And so after a little bit, I went to the bathroom, and I was actually able to go. I actually was able to have a bowel movement. And I know this is TMI, but you know how when you go to the bathroom, when you have a bowel movement, you feel that relief. And so I went, and I didn't feel any relief at all. In fact, I still felt a lot of pressure. So I was really confused about what was going on. But then once I wiped, I realized that there was blood. And then I realized that I was bleeding quite a bit. And I started having these cramps, these really strong cramps. And I was so worried. Instantly, I was really scared. And so I went to my husband and I told him what was going on. And as we talked about it, at one point I just started sobbing. and I was so scared that we were having a miscarriage. Just because I was bleeding, I was having heavy cramps, I was just so afraid that our baby was gone. And so after talking with my husband, we felt like we should just go to the hospital. So we drove over to a hospital that was about 5 minutes away from where we lived. It was really close. And when we got there, when they found out that I was over 20 weeks, I was about 20 and a half weeks at this point, they sent me over to labor and delivery. As we were walking over there, I still had cramps that would come and go, but I realized that sometimes they weren't as strong as the others. They still hurt, but then they weren't as strong, so I was hoping that maybe it was getting better. And so when we got over to a room, a nurse was there and she asked me some questions regarding my medical history, about the pregnancy, and they drew some blood to do some labs. I remember that after she was asking me all those questions, the whole time I was just praying that there would be a heartbeat. And then once she put the monitors on me, then we heard the heartbeat right away. I remember just feeling so much relief. I was just so happy to hear that heartbeat and happy that my baby was still there, their heart was still beating. And the heartbeat was around 150, 155, and it sounded strong and good. And so I felt so happy. The nurse said that most likely the discomfort, that it was probably just like a normal part of pregnancy, that they weren't super concerned about it. Since I was past 20 weeks, they said that they would just have to check my cervix and then they would send us home. And so I remember just being so relieved, like, okay, everything is fine, everything's okay, the baby's healthy, and we're gonna go back home. Now, I've always heard that cervical checks were uncomfortable, and so I was just kind of prepared for some discomfort with that happening. And so the nurse went in and she tried to check my cervix. She was in there for a while, and I felt like she was kind of, digging deep, looking around. And then she had kind of like a puzzled look on her face. And she was very professional about it, and so she told us that she was having a hard time finding my cervix, and so she was going to go get another nurse and have the nurse check it out. And so I was like, okay, yeah, that's fine. I didn't think anything of it. So she left the room, and a couple minutes later she came back with the nurse, and then the doctor actually came in as well, the OB that was on call. And so the doctor was actually the one getting ready, like putting his gloves on to check me, and so the other nurse that came in just came up next to me and said, hey, just so you know, there's also this one thing called cervical incompetence. And then she kind of explained what that was to me. And I was listening, but I wasn't really paying much attention because I thought it was just kind of standard procedure for the hospital to explain things to patients, and I didn't think it would affect me at all. The doctor went and he checked me, and again, it was uncomfortable and he was feeling around. And then I remember that after he checked me, he sat down next to the bed and he looked at me and he told me that I had cervical incompetence, which basically means that my cervix wasn't strong enough to hold the baby in my uterus full term. And he said that I was already dilated to a 4 and that the water sac was bulging out, and so I was in labor. He said that with the gestational age that my baby was at, just 20 and a half weeks, and since there was nothing that they could do to undo the labor, they said that I would end up losing the baby. When I heard the doctor say those words, I could feel my heart just sank. And I was just in complete and utter shock. I didn't understand what was going on. All the emotions that I felt, and I was just so confused. And it was just so weird because I had just went from feeling so much relief and happiness that everything was okay, to then finding out that we were going to lose our baby and that there was nothing we can do about it. And he kind of explained what was going to happen. He said that they weren't going to stop my labor and they also weren't going to speed it up. They were just going to let things take its natural course. But he said that I would just be staying in the hospital until we had our baby. And then I remember he left and the nurse was kind of explaining things that was going on, but I remember I just looked at Jared and we didn't know what to do. We were just so shocked and we just started crying. We were definitely not prepared to receive that kind of news. Going to the hospital, we thought it was a possibility of having a miscarriage, but then once we heard the heartbeat, we felt like everything was going to be okay. And I remember I just felt so scared, and honestly I felt so guilty. because my baby was healthy, but because of a weakness or a fault that my body had, that my baby wasn't gonna survive. And I just felt so sad, and I kept thinking back like, oh, is there something that I could have done differently today, yesterday, last week? I felt like everything was just out of my control and I didn't know what to do. And the sad thing with cervical incompetence is that you can never find out until your first pregnancy. And oftentimes it's when it's too late. For me, it was so sad to find out that this has happened to other people. And same thing, that they have a perfectly healthy pregnancy and then they find out when it's too late and when nothing can be done. My husband and I, we were just so in shock. And then we decided to call our parents, because we're both really close to both of our parents. And we thought it'd be best to let them know what was going on. And so this was around like 11 o'clock at night at this point. And so we called both of our parents. And honestly, those were the two hardest phone calls that I've ever had to make. It was so hard to try to explain to them what was going on when we didn't fully understand. We were still trying to comprehend what was going on, and just explaining to them that we were going to lose our baby. We didn't know when or how long this was going to take, and there was nothing that could be done, and so we just felt so hopeless. And our parents were really nice. They kept asking us if there was anything that they could do to help us, and at that point we didn't feel like we needed anything. After we called them, we decided to try to get some sleep, and I was still having those cramps that would come and go, and then I realized that they were contractions. So I was having contractions throughout the night, but then at one point they stopped. They started becoming less frequent, less strong, and then I felt like I didn't have contractions. And so the next morning, I told the nurse that, and I told that OB that was on call. And then they said that if I stopped having contractions and if the water sac relaxed, they said that there was hope. That if everything worked out good, that they would see if they can push the water sac back in and then put a stitch called a cerclage in my cervix to keep it closed for a little bit longer, to see if we could at least make it to viability or just see how far we can make it. And when I heard that, I felt so grateful that there was just a sliver of hope. And so I remember all that day, I just kept praying that a miracle would happen, that I would stop having contractions, that they'd be able to do the stitch, that I could keep my baby in and give my baby a shot to survive. I just wanted to give my baby that chance. I remember I just kept praying that whole day. And my parents came to visit us, and my mom stayed with me and my dad went with my husband to go get some things at our house because we weren't prepared to stay in the hospital. So he went and got some things and came back. I remember we were just talking to them. Honestly, those days were kind of a blur. But I remember just feeling so much support from them. I felt hope because I wasn't really having those contractions. But then in the evening and in the night, I started having contractions again. I was in denial. I kept thinking like, oh, if like my mind is strong, and so I kept telling myself, oh no, I'm just feeling discomfort. Oh, this is just indigestion. Oh, it just feels like I have gas, which honestly it did kind of feel like that, but it was a little bit stronger. I just kept telling myself like, no, it's okay. Everything's gonna work out. We're gonna have the surgery, have the stitch in. Everything will be okay. And so the next morning, the doctor came back in and he checked me. I remember he was so kind. And I just remember seeing in his face, he was like, I'm so sorry, you're dilated to 5.5 and the water sac is just bulging out, so there'd be no way for me to push it back in. And so at that point I knew there was nothing that could be done. And so it was just a waiting game at that point. So at this point it was Sunday, and the whole day I was just having contractions. And my husband's parents came and they spent some time with us. We played some card games. They would try to take our mind off of things. And then we also had some really close friends come and visit us, and also my uncle and aunt. And I just remember throughout that time we just felt so much love and support from our family members, and we really, really appreciated it. They were able to help in whatever way they could. That night, Sunday night, I remember before we went to sleep, we were just talking, and our eyes were opened and we realized how many people lose their children, lose babies, and it was just so sad to just think about how so many people have gone through this pain. And at that point my contractions were stronger, and so Jared, he had this little couch that he would just sleep in the hospital room. But then this night we moved the couch over right next to the bed so that he could sleep right next to me. And that night I remember I was just trying to find peace, because I knew there was nothing we could do, but I just tried to find peace. And I remember all during that night I would stay awake. I had a really hard time sleeping, but I would just stay awake. I would listen to the heartbeat because our baby was still alive. And so I would just listen to that heartbeat, and I tried to remember it. I was trying to engrave that sound into my mind so that I could remember it forever. And I wasn't on any medication because we didn't know how long it would take, and so I just decided to not have an epidural or anything just because we didn't know how long the labor would take. But around 2 in the morning I started having contractions that were really strong, really painful. And so I woke up my husband, and he was helping me during the contractions. He let me squeeze his hand and his arm. He would even do some counter pressure on my back. And we just kept doing that just throughout the night. The nurse that came in that morning, it was actually a cool little miracle that happened. She asked us where we were from, and we told her the city that we were from, and then come to find out she actually lived in my husband's parents' neighborhood. And so she knew his family. And she said, you know what, it's pretty cool that I'm over here, because usually I never work here, and I'm happy that I can be here to help you guys. She was so great. She was so kind, and I was so grateful to have her there with us. But we told her what was going on. I was having a lot of contractions, I was in a lot of pain, and I felt more pressure. So the nurse went and got the doctor, and the doctor that was on call, he came in and he checked me, and he said that I was fully dilated and that it was time for me to push. The water sac was still intact, like my water never broke. And so he wanted to see if we could deliver the whole water sac. And at this point we still didn't know the gender of our baby. We were waiting until our anatomy scan that we were going to have at 21 weeks. Just because since we were newlyweds and students, we didn't want to spend any extra money on an early ultrasound or any blood work to try to find out the gender early. And so we still didn't know the gender. And we had picked out some names in case if it was a boy or in case if it was a girl, because we didn't want to name our baby. So the doctor was explaining to me how to push, and the nurse was really nice, and she gave me a medication in an IV. I don't remember what medication it was, but I wanted something for the pain because they said that since I was in labor this early, it would be possible that the placenta wouldn't come out full. And if it didn't come out full and intact, they would kind of have to dig and kind of scrape at my uterus to get the whole thing out. And so that sounded painful to me, so I wanted to have just some kind of pain medication just in case that had to happen. The medication kicked in and the doctor explained to me how to push, and we started pushing. This was around 9-10 in the morning on Monday, February 17th of 2020. I didn't push for very long. It took me a couple pushes to kind of figure out how to push, but then I still felt a lot of pressure just because the water was still intact. And so even though at 20 weeks my baby was still small, the water sac was still a lot of pressure, and so I felt a lot of stretching and burning. As I was pushing, the doctor was really good at talking me through it. And I was pushing, and I felt a lot of pressure, and then suddenly I felt the water bag just pop. It just burst, and water got everywhere. I felt bad, but it got all over the doctor and the nurse. It was all over my legs, and my baby came out. And before I started pushing, the doctor told me that because my baby was so small, it was possible that my baby wouldn't survive labor. Or they also told me that if my baby did survive labor, sometimes they would only survive just a couple minutes. I was just hoping and praying that I would be able to see my baby alive. When my water bag broke and the baby came out, my baby was still alive. And I'm so grateful. The doctor was really quick. He was really quick at cutting the cord and getting everything ready just so then we could hold our baby, because he saw that our baby was still alive. Since he was moving so quickly, he said, "It's a boy." And my husband, it was funny, he just had a feeling that it was a girl. And so he told the doctor, he was like, "No, it's not a boy, it's a girl." I was just in shock because we never found out the gender. And I was like, the doctor just said it's a boy. And the nurse was holding our baby at the time, and then she looked and she was like, "No, he's right, it's a girl." And the doctor was like, "Oh, okay, I'm sorry, my bad." We had her name picked out. We knew for sure if it was a girl, her name would be Evelyn Rose. The nurse just wrapped her in a blanket and then laid her on my chest. And she was perfect. She was so small. But I remember just looking at her and I was just amazed at how defined her features were. Even though she was so small and so early, we could see the features on her face. Her skin was still translucent, so she looked kind of dark red or purple, because that's just how baby's skin look at that gestational age. Her eyes were still sealed shut and her ears were still kind of pressed against her head, but she was perfect. I was just seeing all the details. We could see her eyebrows starting to grow in and her eyelashes. And I was just so grateful that she was alive. And the nurse asked me if I wanted to do skin to skin. And so we went ahead and did that, and I was just so happy to hold my baby. And then I realized I wanted my husband to be able to hold her. Since we didn't know how long she was going to live, I wanted him to at least be able to hold her while she was alive. And so my husband got to hold her. And I remember I just loved seeing him hold her. I always knew that he was going to be such a good dad, but just seeing him hold her and seeing the love that he had in his face, it was just really touching. And at that point I was just overwhelmed with just this feeling of sadness that I felt like I also let my husband down by my body not being able to hold our baby full term. And I just felt so sad and guilty, and I loved seeing my baby there. I loved seeing Evelyn, and I just felt so sad knowing that we wouldn't be able to keep her for very long. I was a mess. I had so many emotions going on. I wanted to be happy and enjoy the time that I had with my daughter, but then I was also in shock of what had just gone on, that I just experienced labor even though I wasn't prepared for it, and thought my baby was here, and then also knowing that I wouldn't be able to keep my baby. But it was just so great to be able to watch my husband hold her. And at that point, our families started coming. That morning when we found out that I was about to push, we told our families what was going on. This was another little miracle, because if you realize the date, this happened just a few weeks before COVID. And so we were able to have as many family members and visitors in. And so our families came, and they were just in the room, and there was just this peaceful feeling in the room, this sweet spirit. My husband and I, we would just take turns holding her. I would just feel so sad if I wasn't holding her, and so my husband would give her to me. And there were just some little details about her that we saw that were just so sweet. I'm so grateful for the time that we had with her being alive, where we were able to touch her hand with our finger, and then she would open up her hand as if she was grabbing our finger. She would also rest her face in her hand like this. She just kept snuggling up into her hand, which we thought was so cute. And sometimes she would breathe and she would take a big breath and she would kind of move her head. And so those little things, we just tried to soak it all in. We were just focusing on her. We watched her. She was just perfect. She was so sweet. And we could tell that she had my nose. We just kept taking turns holding her. And then the nurse would come in periodically and she would check for a heartbeat. And anytime she would check for a heartbeat, I would just hold my breath. And then when she said, "Yep, the heart is still beating," I just felt so relieved. We were able to just keep holding her, and there were some sweet little miracles that happened. And at one point my husband was holding her, and he said that he was watching her and that he saw her take a breath, and he had a feeling and he knew that it was her last breath. So the nurse came in and took her and checked her heartbeat, and she was like, "Yeah, the heart's not beating anymore, she's gone." And again, I was just so filled with emotions. I don't think anyone should ever have to go through watching their child die. It was just a lot for me to process. There was, again, the guilt, the frustration, the disappointment. anger, sadness, just all of the emotions I was feeling. Our family, they all left the room. They gave my husband and I some time to be there with her. The nurse helped take care of me because after pushing, I was just focusing on holding my baby, but my bladder was full and I was just still really uncomfortable. And so the nurse helped me, and after going to the bathroom and getting some medication, I started to feel better physically. And so then a social worker came in and we were able to wash our daughter. We had these little wipes and we were able to clean her body, and we were just looking at her little body and her features. And we could tell that her feet were going to be like my husband's, and we could tell that she was really long. She had long limbs, and so we could tell that she was going to be tall, at least taller than me. And she had high arches in her feet, and it was so cool that even though she was only 20, at this point she would have almost been 21 weeks. But just to see all of the features that she had, how perfect she was, it was just incredible. And we were able to put a little cloth diaper on her and a little headband. And we were just able to hold her. The social worker was so nice. We were so grateful. We were able to get some little handprints and footprints. We also were able to get pictures with her. And it was just so special. All those little things were just so tender. Well, I guess I should mention, so she was alive for an hour and a half. We were so grateful to have her for an hour and a half. She was born around 9:30 in the morning and passed away around 11 in the morning. I will always treasure that time when we were able to have her and see her alive. The social worker helped us. We also got some, I don't know, like ceramic imprints, I guess, of her feet and her hands. And it was just so great to be able to have little things to help us remember her. After we did that, our families came back into the room, and then they had the chance to hold Evelyn and see her up close. It was just so cool seeing our family members watch her, and they were so great, so supportive. The word that everyone used to describe her was perfect. They would just hold her and they would look at her and they'd just say, she's perfect. She's just perfect. My husband and I, we also had decisions to make on what we wanted to do with the body. And we decided that we did want to have her buried. And so they told us that the mortuary would be there that afternoon at around 5 o'clock in the evening. And I remember at that point I thought like, oh, there's no way that I'll be able to part with my daughter. Like, I just want to hold her body forever. And so our families were there for a few hours and then they left. And so it was just my husband and I, and we just kept taking turns holding her and watching her. And as the hours went by, it was just really sad to see her body start to change. It started to, like, the color was changing, so you started to, I guess, decay a little bit, which makes sense, you know, because she had passed away. And so at that point, it was just really hard to keep watching her. And we wanted to remember her, how she was when she was alive. We were at peace when the morgue came to pick up the body. And honestly, like, the next few days, it was just a blur. We were just so in shock of what happened. We were trying to process everything that happened. And the next day, we did have a little burial service for her with our families there. Honestly, we didn't have the mental capacity to try to organize anything or decide all those things. So our family was so helpful during that time. They organized everything. They just asked us some things if we were okay with it, like of where she would be buried, if we were okay if they brought flowers. It was just really special to just have something, and I felt like it gave me closure and peace to be able to do something to honor my daughter. It was just great to have some family there and for all of their support. This was the hardest experience I have ever gone through, and it just breaks my heart knowing that there are so many other people out there who have gone through something similar, who experienced this kind of heartache and pain from this loss. And my heart just goes out to any of you who are suffering or who are feeling this pain. I see you, and just know you are not alone. You know, through this time, it has been 3 years, and we have been able to find peace and healing, but it's still hard, it still hurts. You know, I still get emotional thinking about it, talking about it. I know that she will always be part of our family. And so my husband and I, you know, we're teaching our kids, we're talking about her because we want them to know that they have an older sister. And she's always going to be part of our family, even though she's not here with us. And honestly, just thinking about her and thinking about that experience that I had, it always motivates me to try to do better and be better. And Anytime that I hear of someone losing a baby or going through something like this, I immediately, I just want to help that person because I know how painful it is. And during those days, we had so much support from friends and family. Anyone that reached out, we saw all those messages. We appreciated everything, all the meals, the gifts, the flowers, the kind words, everything. But I just wanted to share this because if you are going through something hard, I just want you to know that you are not alone. And there is hope. I have been able to find some healing and find some ways to be able to be at peace and still honor my daughter and love her. So this experience it's really changed me. It's something that I will always remember. It's something that I do think about frequently. Yeah, so that's my story. I know this was kind of a longer video, so if you made it to the end, thank you for watching. Those little babies, those angels, they're closer than we think. There are several times when I still feel my daughter's presence, and it's something that I find really comforting. Thank you all for watching, and hope you have a great day. Bye.